Most weather systems play by the rules, right? Well, today we're tracking an atmospheric beast that completely tore up the meteorological rulebook. We're looking at a shape-shifting monster that morphed from a Pacific anomaly into a global disruptor, paralyzing shipping lanes, freezing the Bering Sea, and unleashing a terrifying ripple effect. Let's dive right in. The storm was named Hagibis. It's a Filipino word that translates to speed, and man, that is exactly what forecasters at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center were dealing with from day one. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill Pacific weather event. It was ramping up way, way faster than any of the models predicted. Just think about this unprecedented 24-hour window. On October 6th, it's a pretty standard tropical storm, clocking in at around 50 knots. But then, exactly 24 hours later, absolute explosive growth. It rockets up to 150 knots, pushes to 160, and finally peaks at a staggering 165 knots. That means its maximum wind speeds jumped an unbelievable 100 miles per hour, literally overnight. This explosive intensification turned Hagibis into a 950-mile-wide Category 5 super typhoon. We're talking the most powerful storm on Earth that entire year. And just like that, the forecast models, which originally had it tracking safely north, completely flipped. It was now barreling straight toward one of the most densely populated places on the planet. Section 1. Devastation in Japan, when water becomes the weapon. The sheer massive scale of Hagibis forced Japan to issue its absolute highest level of warning, advising a staggering 1/3 of the entire population to evacuate. Out on the water, gigantic oil tankers like the BW Shinano had to make sudden, massive detours just to get the Japanese islands between themselves and the storm. Now, when Hagibis finally hit cooler waters and made landfall, its winds did actually drop to a Category 2, but the internal dynamics were so incredibly violent that the supercell thunderstorms inside it actually started spawning tornadoes right upon impact. But here's the thing. The wind wasn't even the primary weapon. Because Hagibis was so enormous and because it had spent so much time soaking up the open ocean, it brought an unprecedented volume of moisture with it. It dumped 3 feet of rain in just 24 hours over parts of Honshu. Rivers instantly breached their banks, massive mudslides wiped out entire neighborhoods. It quickly became terrifyingly clear that catastrophic flooding, not the wind, was the real killer here. The aftermath on the ground was just heartbreaking. With 98 tragic fatalities and a staggering $15 billion in damages, Hagibis cemented itself as the most costly typhoon in recorded history. But honestly, the scariest part is that this monster was just getting started on its second act. Section 2. The storm mutates, breaking meteorological rules. Okay, so normally a super typhoon feeds off the heat of warm tropical waters to maintain a tight, highly organized core. But as Hagibis pushed north, it lost that crucial heat source. And instead of just fizzling out like you'd expect, it mutated. It started drawing power from the chaotic collision of hot and cold air. It completely transformed into a massive extratropical cyclone, way less organized, sure, but significantly larger in sheer size. Lieutenant Caitlin Fine from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center summed it up perfectly. The mechanics of the storm radically shifted. By pushing so far north, Hagibis essentially tapped directly into the jet stream. And this high-altitude river of air acted like a giant conveyor belt, catapulting this newly mutated beast northeast across the Pacific, straight toward the Aleutian Islands and the Bering Sea. And this is where things get truly bizarre. Hagibis didn't just bring its own terrible weather. Its circulation center grew so massive that it acted like a giant vacuum. It started funneling down freezing air from Siberia and then actually sucked in a second, completely separate storm system from Russia. It whipped this second storm into a dangerous new path right alongside it, violently altering weather patterns for thousands of miles. Unbelievable. Section 3. The Great Circle Route. Highway on the water. Now, the National Weather Service in Anchorage was watching all of this unfold, and they immediately blasted out urgent warnings to marine traffic. The remnants of Hagibis, combined with that second Russian storm it had dragged along, were threatening to whip up monstrous mountainous waves, easily topping 40 to 50 feet. To really put that into perspective, they recorded hurricane-force wind gusts of 97 miles per hour hitting Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands. That is not just a stiff breeze, folks. That is a landscape-altering atmospheric bombardment, and it was happening right in the middle of one of the world's most crucial maritime corridors. The vessels caught in this corridor were pushed right to the absolute limit. You had the oil tanker Ardmore Dauntless battling 30-foot waves and extreme cold that threatened to literally freeze its cargo and its life-saving gear. Then you had the HMCS Ottawa, a heavy Canadian Navy frigate forced to punch straight through 6-meter seas just to stay afloat. They were burning 20% more fuel, and just walking down a hallway became a brutal physical challenge. Commander Benjamin Golightly of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Alex Haley, a ship known as the Bulldog of the Bering Sea, reminds us exactly what was at stake here. They protect a $6.4 billion fishing industry in those waters. He brought up the chilling 2004 disaster of the Silindana U, a merchant ship that broke apart in a similar storm on this very route, costing 6 mariners their lives. In these freezing waters, if you go in, you literally only have minutes. Section 4. The Bering Sea Battle, Fighting for Survival and Livelihood. So this created an absolute nightmare catch-22 for the Alaskan king crab fleet. If they stayed out at sea to grab the first catch of the season, the 40-foot waves from Hagibis could easily roll and sink their boats. But hiding in port meant bleeding thousands of dollars on fuel, bait, and food, all while missing out on the prime fishing grounds. Dozens of vessels, including the Aleutian Lady and the Kari Marie, had to make a really tough life-or-death call. They crammed into Dutch Harbor, tying up incredibly tight, because if even one boat broke loose in those 97-mile-per-hour winds, it could take out half the fleet. Captain Rick Shelford from the Aleutian Lady really puts you right there on the water. It was an agonizing waiting game. These tough fishermen just had to sit helplessly at the dock, constantly replacing blown-out buoys as their massive steel ships violently smashed into one another for days on end. And once the absolute worst of it finally passed, there was no waiting for calm waters. They headed straight out into 16-foot residual seas. That meant working out on a frozen, pitching deck, stacking heavy crab pots without any safety harnesses. Make no mistake, falling overboard in those conditions is almost certain death. But here's a twist you might not expect. The typhoon didn't just threaten them physically, it actually changed the chemistry of the water. Hagibis acted like a giant atmospheric spoon, scooping warmer tropical waters deep into the frigid Bering Sea. Because of that, the king crab migrated hundreds of miles, leaving these crews pulling up empty pots and risking their lives for basically nothing. However, for the crews that pushed through the absolute misery and kept hunting, that perseverance paid off big time. When they finally located the new crab grounds, the haul was massive. A single 10-pound king crab, what these guys call a sea spider, fetched almost $100. Captain Rick and the Aleutian Lady braved the terrible residual weather and managed to pull in 70,000 pounds of crab, making them the most successful boat out there after the storm. Finally, after tearing up the entire Pacific, Hagibis ran out of steam and dissipated over eastern Siberia, right near the edge of the Arctic Circle. But just look at this legacy. It went from an explosive tropical storm to causing the most devastating flood event in Japanese history to a mutated extratropical cyclone that hijacked a Russian storm, paralyzed global shipping, and literally altered the water temperature of the Bering Sea crab grounds. Absolutely mind-blowing. Which brings us to the end of this